Hello, welcome to Trauma-Informed Restorative Practices, Part B. My name is Jordan. I am Haruv USA's coordinator. We are so excited that everyone could join us today. Some housekeeping reminders, please keep your cameras on, but your mics muted unless you are answering or asking a question. You're welcome to participate that way. You're also welcome to participate through the chat box as well. We'll be monitoring that. Joe McQueen is leading our lecture again today. Again, the link to his book is in the chat box. But otherwise, Joe, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be back for Part B. Hopefully everybody in here was in Part A. I encourage, I try to keep it pretty simple. So at any time, feel free to ask questions. And if you want to know more about something or need me to elaborate on something, I'd be very, very happy to do so. Again, my name is Joe McQueen. I'm a principal at an alternative school here in Central Illinois. I've been in education for about 25 years, spent the majority of my time working in residential detention centers and day schools and alternative schools. So I'm excited to share with you restorative practices. Also excited that I just did some work with a company out of New Zealand last week and did some training for some schools out there. And they want to know more about restorative practices. So this seems to be kind of a global thing. Everybody's wanting to know more about it and to learn more about it. So I think that's exciting as somebody who is very passionate about that. All right, we will just jump right in unless anybody, if you have any questions for me, we can get started. All right, so I think this is where we left off last time. We were talking about effective communication, and this goes to when you're doing some restorative circles or restorative conversations with students one-on-one. I know there was some on our feedback, some people wanted me to relate this more to some younger kids as well. So I'm going to make a pretty good effort to do that. I have seen it done in kindergartens and first grade, all the way up through 12th grade, and also done with prisoners and those kind of settings as well. So it is something that's applicable to all ages. So we'll just kind of review this last slide we went over toward at the end of our last session, and then we'll hop right in here. So effective communication is a big deal. It's a big deal for everybody. I say if you're an effective communicator, you're a better spouse, you're a better parent, you're a better friend, but also you're a better educator. And part of that is using respectful language that reinforces what you're wanting to say. Again, I'm not going to read you guys off the slides. I would guess that if you're all here today, you probably have enough education that you probably read better than most humans. So, but really respectful language. And I think that is the biggest part of maintaining that level of respect and calmness and just giving kids, I say this a lot, kids should always receive an endless supply of dignity and respect. And that includes when we're communicating with them and they're struggling with things. We have to be respectful. And that also gives us the opportunity to model that respectful information or respectful communication. Sorry, it's been a long day. I've had like 3 kids and some struggling situations, and got to jump right in here. And it's hard to switch hats. It takes me a minute sometimes. Um, so modeling that communication with kids, using honest expressions, being helpful, communicating feelings, identifying feelings. But whatever we do and whatever we encourage kids when they communicate with each other, it's the same thing. When we do restorative conversations with 2 kids, and I did one this morning already, we remind them a lot that we use respectful language. It has to be helpful, not hurtful, and that we have to be solution based. We can each share our side of what happened or our version of what happened through the lens that we see the world. But at the end of the day, we're here to find a solution. We're here to figure something out so we can make amends and move on. So having restorative conversations. Every time people ask me, how often do you have them? And I say, every time I feel like there's been harm done or I've had kids with conflict. So I'm going to talk about these points for a second, and then I'll talk about how it's applicable for different ages as well. So every time there's harm done, now harm can be mild as a kid hitting another kid with a toy. My kids this morning were cussing at each other and talking about each other's family members. So there's definitely a little bit of harm done there. Preceding an office referral, we don't do a lot of office referrals just because the way we're set up. I'm in the classrooms most of the time. And really my goal is to have my teachers, if they're going to send somebody to me, I'd rather them step in the hallway and have that conversation while I cover their classroom. Because otherwise, all I am seen as is like the authority figure. And in long term, I start to build better relationships with those students than their teachers have. And that's not going to work because now we're heavy sided on one end. So I prefer the teachers step out and try to problem solve with them. But if there is a case where, a kid's out of control and has to leave the classroom, then that definitely we're gonna have a restorative conversation after we've de-escalated that student and figure out what we need to do to move forward. Anytime there's a disciplinary process with the staffs involved, we may do a full circle. We did a full circle this morning with our junior high kids, God bless their souls. And we really just talked about not being mean to each other. I don't know what happened over January, but it seems our kids went away for Christmas break and we had a blizzard out here. So we only did 5 school days in January. And I think everybody's still readjusting to being back at school. And then really anytime it's beneficial, you can't just have restorative conversations when there's negative things. You can have restorative conversations anytime you see fit. Hey, let's pull these 2 kids together, these 3 kids together, and have a conversation. And then link those conversations to your school culture and values. So we say a lot of like around here or here at Ray's, this is how we do things, or this is how we treat people. Just kind of hoping to drive that into like, that's part of our culture. That's part of who we are. We treat people nicely. We have restorative conversations, and we always are based on finding solutions. So people would say, how do you do this with like little kids? Well, it's on a simpler level. So I've seen this done with kindergartners that got in like a little argument on the playground. Now their level, their ability to process the world's very different, just based on some brain development. So you got to keep that in mind. Like metacognition is kind of a big buzzword. And I think that people aren't really at the place to really think metacognitively until they're in their teens. But we can teach people the processes of how to think metacognitively, if that makes sense. So really metacognition is just thinking about how I think. So when we take littler kids, it's thinking about what happened and breaking down that process. So if they have 2 kids getting an argument on the playground, one kid says something mean to the other kid, maybe they hit him with a jump rope. I'm used to kids just being kind of aggressive, so maybe I'm going too far. But then we sit down and we talk about like, how come you made that decision? Why did you hit that person with a jump rope? What were your feelings? What were your emotions? And helping them to identify feelings. I was mad. Well, what does mad feel like in your body? Getting them to start explaining those things, because the sooner kids can experience their emotions and recognize what they are and find a way to attach that to a name, were you angry or were you frustrated? There's a difference. Now, I don't expect them to really, understand that fully until they're a little bit older, but at least you've given the opportunity to stop, break down what was our feeling, why did we respond the way we responded, how did you feel when you hit that kid with a jump rope? Did it make you feel better? Did you feel kind of bad? Were you scared because you thought you hurt him? Really walking through that process, and then having the other child do it too. Like, what was happening? How come he was angry with you? And working through that. I said this. Well, how come you said that? Because I wanted the jump rope. How did you feel when he hit you with the jump rope? Well, it hurt and it made me angry. Getting those kids to work through those things is teaching them to take a step-by-step walk through their emotional growth and through their emotional experiences. Like, what does anger feel like early, and what does rage feel like? Hitting somebody with the jump rope's kind of your borderline rage there. That's pretty harsh. So doing that metacognitively with younger kids and getting them to break that down makes them better at doing it when they're older kids. I would love to live in a world where I had a kid come into my office, and I worked again with junior high and high school kids, that said, I was really frustrated and I lost the ability to use words and I acted out aggressively, and I feel bad about that. And I probably could have made better decisions early on by walking away. Wouldn't that be great if we could all do that? It'd be great if all the adults of the world could do that. So having those restorative conversations and using them to teach that metacognitive breakdown of how we, all of the things that led up to the situation. And there's a lot of times where we figure out that there was a lot of issues going on before the issues. The kid who hit the kid with the jump rope may have missed breakfast or had a bad morning, and that was just the thing. That jump rope was the straw that broke the camel's back. So this is just kind of a breakdown of some of those restorative conversations. A lot of times we want to ask students like, what happened, and allow them to tell their whole side of the story. They each have a version of the story. I'm sure we've all heard the saying, there's 2 sides for each situation. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. even if we witness it, we witness the truth. We know what happened. But allowing them, because every kid sees the world through a different lens. And when you're dealing with, especially like teenagers who are impulsive and are driven by emotion, then they see the world through a very different world. When you're dealing with younger kids who don't understand how to express themselves, maybe, then they see the world through a different lens. So allowing them to tell their whole story and listening to it and using the listening skills we talked about before. If it's a big deal to them, it's a big deal to you. If they felt super, super angry and we think there's no reason why you should feel that angry, well, that's not really for us to determine. We don't get to measure different people's feelings, and we don't get to value it based on how we think they should feel. They feel the way they feel. And then again, that kind of brings us into what were your thoughts and feelings at the time? And we talked about this metacognitive practice. I do these trainings a lot, so sometimes I get a slide or two ahead, so I apologize. I'll say it, and then you get to get a chance to read it. So using that metacognitive practice to do some reflection, walk through those emotions, walk through that problem solving, definitely identify who or what was harmed. Remember, it's not always a person. It can be a thing. I wouldn't go into too much detail if a little kid kicked a chair to talk about the harm they did to the chair. The chair is an inanimate object. Unless they broke it, I'm not going to pretend like the chair has feelings. I've seen that happen. Well, how do you think the chair feels? The chair's fine. Like, I don't want you to feel extra guilt or emotion because now you think you hurt something that you didn't hurt. Now, if you break it, we need to have a conversation about that. So I think, working through those things, identifying what was harmed and who was harmed, and then how do we repair that? How do we fix that? Sometimes it's just I'm sorry. And sorry can be really difficult, especially for your older sets of kids. Sorry is pretty easy for younger kids. They're willing to say it. There's not as much a shame attached to it as when they become teenagers and they become very self-absorbed, where sorry is an admittance of you being wrong or bad, and now it carries like a lot of emotion with it. So kids can come up with creative ways to say sorry, and if they don't say the actual word sorry, if the other kid knows what they're saying and they both agree, I mean, I've had kids just dab each other up. Boom, fist bump, shake hands, cool. Nobody says they're sorry, but a sorry was transferred between them. There was something that took place that those two were able to find peace and make a connection again, and that's fine. If they break something, then we kind of have to talk about that, and a lot of that falls on your school policy. I typically don't charge kids when they break something because I have kids who come from an underserved population, and I'm not going to debt their family financially for a mistake that they made. So I may have them help with repair if it can be, repaired. Like a hole in the wall is pretty easy. They can help patch that up and work with somebody. If they break a chair, then they break a chair. I'll definitely share what it costs for me to fix that and talk about how if their family had to pay for that $200 chair, what a financial burden it might be on that family. And just acknowledge that you got to be careful what you do because you're not always going to be in places like this that don't want to burden people outside of here. If you do this in the community, they will write you a ticket and it will cost you $200 to fix the chair. So making that relationship between that repair as well. Does anybody have any questions yet? You can just unmute and holler out and I'll try to answer. I'll take a drink while I'm waiting for you guys. All right. I'm easing in now. I'm out of that principal hat, back into talking hat. It took a minute. All right, so restorative conversations. This is a short video, and then after this video, I'm going to have you guys take a few minutes to maybe jot down some reflections, and then you can share them through chat, or you can share them through just unmuting, and we'll kind of break that down. It's not a very long video. You may have to adjust the volume on your screen, and here we go.
Restorative practices teaches kids how to resolve conflict peacefully. Restorative practices promote empathy, responsibility, and respect. These practices focus on repairing harm, building relationships, and giving everyone a voice. Restorative conversations are a transformative way for everyone, especially young people, to navigate difficult conversations. These conversations are really helpful when managing conflict with peers. Here are 6 steps you can take to start having restorative conversations with your peers. Step number 1, prepare yourself. Before you can resolve conflict, set an intention to connect before you correct. In other words, you must have an understanding mindset that is ready to listen and work towards finding a peaceful resolution. You can do this by focusing on your breathing. Breathe in deeply for 3 seconds, and then exhale deep and slow for 6 seconds. Be sure to use I statements. For example, I felt angry, or I felt upset, or I felt hurt. You can also use I noticed that as a way to start a sentence. Remember, go low and slow. Take your time. Don't rush the restorative process. Acknowledge your feelings no matter how deep or hard. Ensure everyone has a voice and has a chance to answer each of the restorative questions. Remember, it's okay to take a break at any time during the process. Step number 2, acknowledge your own personal needs, emotions, and thoughts. Step number 3, use restorative questions. It's important that you're able to take the perspective of others. Each person should explain the situation from their perspective. Try to see the situation from the point of view of the other person. Remember, people may often feel very differently about the same situation. Ask questions such as, what happened? What's been going on for you? What were you feeling? Step number 4, how can we repair the harm that has been done? We must work together to decide how to make things better or solve the problem. Step number 5, come up with a shared agreement. This can be a verbal agreement, a checklist, or even a written contract. And then step number 6, check in and check up. Address any concerns that might come up in the future. Remember, conflict is inevitable. It's gonna happen, but it can be transformed through restorative conversations. Perhaps the most important thing to remember about having restorative conversations is to show compassion, to be authentic, and practice empathy. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media at Restorative Practices.
All right, so that's a video that I have our kids watch here, but it's also a video I have our teachers watch at the beginning of the year because we participate in restorative conversations as well. And we have to remember the same things that we're asking our kids to remember. Not every restorative conversation is a kid and a kid. A lot of times it's an adult and a child. And if we can't practice and model those things, then we're not setting an example for the kid when we ask them to do those things. So we have to be open-minded. We have to take ownership. We have to understand their view, their point of view. So real quick, reflectively on restorative conversations, I thought just write down what you took away, a couple of key things, like he just gave us 6 of them. Some key things you took away that you might put in your pocket that you would have with you for when it's time to have that restorative conversation that you could pull out and maybe look at again and share with another person to prepare yourself. One of the things I like he talked about in the beginning is preparing yourself. I think as adults, we should almost always be prepared. That's hard for us because, again, we have to kind of have a higher level of self-regulation than most of the kids we work with. But for kids, there sometimes is some preparation. I separate kids and we won't have a restorative conversation time till the next day or at the end of the day, because people need time away and time to process and time to think and time to calm down. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. My clock says 12:50. Hopefully it's correct. It's a cellular device, so they're never wrong. So at 12:55, we can see if some people want to share out or have some conversations around this before we roll on to the next part. All right, I was looking at some of your guys' responses. Kind of go back up here a little bit. I do agree adults need regulated, but that's one of the hardest parts of our jobs is to regulate ourselves. I think that's a big ask. I think that's part of why we have a high level of turnover in education is because it's hard to stay self-regulated when everybody around you might not be. Um, and then ELL, that's a really good question. I would think that you would have somebody on your campus who works with those students who has a better way of communicating with them than you do. So I would say bring that person into the loop if they're so we have EFL, ESL, and a lot of programs here at our regional office. And if I have a kid who struggles with communicating, I go get one of those instructors to come help me to be part of that situation to work things out. That would be my best advice. I know it's probably not, I wish we could all speak all the languages. That would be super cool. I think the step in the classroom has made a huge difference with my teachers over the years. The first 2 years I was here, I did all like the heavy lifting kind of stuff because they none of them knew what restorative practices was. They weren't really that well trained on trauma informed de-escalation and understanding trauma and things like that. And although I had trained them on that, it was kind of hard to get its footing. And so over the last few years, I've totally gone to where like you deal with the kid, not me, not in a bad way, like you deal with them, not me, but more of a if you deal with them one-on-one, your relationship will be better. And if you can problem solve even with two kids, it was in your classroom where those two kids had an issue. If you can walk those two kids through restorative conversation as their teacher, it builds more respect for you and them. Your relationships are better. And I hate to use the word authority, but they honor your authority a little bit more. If I'm the one that always has to come in and do that, then I kind of rob you of your power in your classroom. And I don't want to do that because that's your domain. That's your world. It's not mine. I'm a guest. I do have kids wait. I saw somebody kind of comment on like giving them some time and space. And every time I agree with what was said here, JB, with letting one kid talk at a time. I usually set parameters around that. Like, look, here's how this is going to work. It's very much like conflict resolution, but we're starting off with one person at a time, sharing their view of the events that happened, and then the other person being able to do it while also reminding them that, we do this in a respectful, helpful tone. It's not like when you were being a jerk. You have to have something to say with that. And like I said, with some of our older kids, especially if I have a physical altercation, we normally won't have a restorative conversation that day. Those kids are separated for the remainder of the day. We will prep each of them at different times to what the expectation is for them to have that restorative conversation. We'll remind them of what a restorative conversation looks like, the goals of a restorative conversation, and what their part is. We may even role play a little bit of it with them, but until they're both regulated and have had time away to calm down and move to a different place, then we're probably not going to have that conversation. Same thing with teachers. I've had kids, just go off on teachers, throw stuff at them, threaten to hit them, and I've got to come in and kind of, get them out of the class. And there's times where that kid's not ready to have that restorative conversation. There's been a few times where the teacher's not ready. And I respect that. If they're like, you know what, I need to go home tonight, sleep on this. That kind of shook me. I need a minute. I can respect that. You're also a human being. You're not a robot. You're a teacher. You're a human just like everybody else. So I think offering that is a big step as well. Just really honoring everybody who's involved and honoring their emotions and their feelings and where they're at and seeing whether they're ready to move on to having a whole conversation about it. I mean, conversation can be tough, and the bigger the trauma, the bigger the event, the tougher that conversation is. Anybody have any other things they want to shout out or ask about or share anything? Did everybody make a little list of anything to help to remind them? They get it tattooed on their arm and they'll never forget. It's a pretty high level of dedication to restorative practices. All right, so what are restorative questions? They're not just any questions. What they are questions that are designed to prompt a healthy, honest reflection. I'm not a big fan of people when they say, what were you thinking? Well, that's different. And I think it's a bit like automatically accusing that they weren't thinking at all or that they're incapable of thinking because only somebody who wasn't thinking would have done what they do. It makes people feel guilty. It makes people feel ashamed. But I definitely think you can say, hey, man, what was going on? Like, what were your feelings at the time? Like, what happened before that that got you there? There's always an antecedent to the behavior. And I think the more we explore the antecedent to any behavior, then the more people can understand their behavior. People just don't pop off for zero reason at all. I mean, if they do, that's a pretty high level of mental health need that they have. Usually there's an antecedent to their behavior. There's something that triggered that. There's something that made them go that route. That's what I would be more interested in figuring out through my restorative questions. The response is pretty easy once we figure out the antecedent. And encourage that understanding of individuals and their thoughts and their actions. We may not agree with them, but at least we can listen to them and understand them and give them an opportunity to share. And then, of course, we need to bring awareness to what needs need to be met afterwards. So now that we've worked through this and we've gotten through some of these questions, what do we need to do? These are the questions we ask. What do we need to do to make this okay? Who do we need to talk to? What things need to be done? How does that look? What part do you play? All of these things are restorative questions. So here's some examples, and I'll give you a second if you want to write these down, but I do share my slides, so you'll be able to get them from there. So just some different ones. So from your perspective, what happened? This is kind of more of an adult leveled question. I don't think that small kids are going to understand the perspective part of it, but you can just narrow that down to what do you think happened or what do you feel like happened? What were you thinking and feeling at the time? So now we combine not just what were you thinking in a sort of derogatory way, but what was your thoughts and your feelings at the time? Because those go together. A good one, I think, especially for younger kids, is if you could go back, how do you feel about things now? Looking back, how do you feel now? Do you feel sad? Do you feel mad? Do you feel guilty? I don't want kids to feel guilty, but kids kind of need to feel guilty if they've done something wrong. But I don't want to harp on that so that it affects their self-esteem and their self-worth. Definitely want to ask kids who's been affected, or what. It may have been nobody. It may have been a thing. But if you're in a classroom and you're a kid and you're throwing the toys all over the place and you're jumping in the toy bin or refusing to clean up, then there are some people that were affected by your behavior as well. They say, well, the classroom's dirty, but who does that affect with the classroom being dirty? Again, kind of diving a little deeper down to get that metacognition process starting. That just because you broke a toy, who else is affected by that? Was that Nathan's favorite toy? Was that Sarah's favorite toy? You know, and what's the hardest thing for you? I think is a really good question to ask kids. Like, what's the hardest thing about working through this situation right now? What do you think is the most difficult feeling you're having? And what is the thing that you think you're going to struggle with most as we repair some of this? And then what needs to happen now to make things right? That's where we start that solution-based thinking. And then, of course, what can be done in the future? Because this may not be the only time you ever in your whole life feel frustrated, angry, sad, whatever emotion it is that you identified. So if that was your emotion, what do we do in the future if we have this emotion again? And I think that's a good question with young kids, you can definitely role play. Little kids like to role play because it gives them an opportunity to walk through the situation again with a different mindset and making different decisions, and it sticks better. It's the old ask me or teach me and I'll know, show me and I'll learn. So it's hard to get junior high and high school kids to role play. Junior high kids, it's really hard to get to role play because that requires, an acknowledgement of emotion, and they don't like to acknowledge emotions. They're way too cool to ever feel anything. But high school kids, sometimes you can get that done. It's hard to say with the kid. Definitely your elementary, grade school, kindergarten kids, you can role play with them all day, and it's amazing. It's like play learning. So they're learning through that process. So this is like a little teamwork thing we do. I'm not sure that we'll be breaking into teams today, but if you want to take this and do it with some of your staff, it's a really simple thing. I call it spilling the tea. See there? See what I did? Tea, spilling the team work. But really, we're going to talk, explore, and accountability. So you'll give everybody a student role, and then you'll have an adult role. And one part is to paraphrase. We talked about that in the first part. Again, if you can paraphrase, you can be a really good communicator. And if you're a really good communicator, you're a better parent, spouse, friend, teacher, everything. In another role, we might just identify the feeling, give people something to act out, something to share, and all the other person does as the adult is just identify the feeling. They're angry, they're sad, they're mad, they're frustrated. Maybe you got some adults that got some really good vocab and feelings, and they might start throwing out some new ones. And then again, we do a paraphrase and then a how do they feel and who are those affected. So again, you give a scenario and then how do they feel and who was affected by that. What was the hardest thing for you? And then we ask the kid that, or that's the student role explaining that. And then as the adult, we have to identify the struggle, identify what they're sharing was the hardest thing for them. And these are all great roles to do when you are having those restorative conversations. You want to paraphrase, you want to identify feelings. You want to know how they feel and who's affected. You want to know what their struggle was. And then do not provide answers, but work on a fair restoration. So again, that's that metacognition, a little higher level. I do this with especially our high school kids. I'm not going to provide you with an answer. I'm just going to ask you what needs to happen now based on your opinion. And then we'll work through a solution. They may come up with a really great one right off the bat, and you're like, man, that's perfect. We should definitely do that. They may come up with something, and you're like, I feel like that's going to cause more harm. So working through that, but having them develop that plan about how they're going to move forward and how they're going to make it right. And then, of course, what's our plan if this happens in the future? Again, just to kind of reiterate what I said a little bit before, with younger kids, you can role play that. Once you get into middle school, high school, it's more of a talking through it. So what if somebody says that to you again? What's your response going to be? And then working with them until they can find a proper response. I had a kid call another kid a homophobic term this morning. Just this morning, like I said, it's a busy morning. That's why it took me a minute to re-regulate myself to talking. And we had to talk about why they said that, what their feelings are about it. And of course, it was one of those things where like, that's how people at home talk. And I'm like, well, that's not how people in the rest of the planet talk. I mean, I can't speak for the whole planet, but if you're going to be a member of society, you may not be able to use that communication and function because you're going to get to a place where people don't respond friendly. They may respond in a way that causes you physical damage. So just talking through how you can't just throw those phrases out there and then talking about, look, both you kids go here and this person identifies this way. You're going to see them every day. So we need to work on how you're going to handle that moving forward because the way you're handling it currently is going to make me have to have meetings and different things like that. And I'll open up the door for that kid to seek out additional resources, So working through a plan. And I mean, the simplest it was, like I said, they're high school kids. He just said, I just won't ever talk to them. And I said, I don't think they would be hurt by that. At some point, you guys might become friends at some point, but I think that for the time being moving forward, I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of sadness around you not communicating with them. So let's stick to that and not communicate with them. I know that some people might be like, gosh, it seems kind of harsh, but that's the solution for now. And then if it happens again, we'll revisit it. And who knows, there may be some reason that they have to interact and all of a sudden they become okay with each other. That's always the goal. Oh, I just went way ahead. All right, this would normally be where we would take a break, but since we're only going for a couple hours today, this is normally like a 6-hour training and I'm doing it in 4. So we do a lot of different things. All right, so The Art of Listening by my buddy Simon Sinek. We're actually not buddies, but I did see him talk before he made it big. And I remember thinking like, man, this guy's pretty cool. What's his name again? And the guy I was with is like Simon Sinek. I don't know. Apparently he's like doing speaking stuff now. And now he's famous. So I don't know if he remembers me, but I remember him. I doubt he remembers me. But here's The Art of Listening, and I love the way he puts things.
So listening is not the act of hearing the words spoken. It is the art of understanding the meaning behind those words. And when people say you're not listening to me and we simply parrot back the words that they were said, congratulations, your ears were. That is the act. That is the act of listening. But the art of listening is creating an environment in which the other person feels heard. Now, you notice what I said there. The other person, and I used an emotional word, feels, right? I don't want to know that you've heard the words. I want to feel, I want to feel heard, feel seen. I want to feel understood. And that is a learnable, practicable skill. So there are many parts of it. It's things like replacing judgment with curiosity, right? That's a hard thing to do. We're a pretty judgy group, right? To be curious why someone has a point of view. It's creating a safe space for someone to, as my friend Dia Khan calls it, empty the bucket. So even if we find what they're saying just reprehensible, right? You're never going to be able to actually have dialogue until at least one of the parties.
I have no idea what just happened there. I will try to speed it up a little bit, though.
As a point of view, it's creating a safe space for someone to, as my friend Dia Khan called it, empty the bucket. So even if we find what they're saying just reprehensible, right? You're never going to be able to actually have dialogue until at least one of the parties gets the opportunity to say everything without judgment. And as she calls it, emptying the bucket. And once somebody feels like they've completely said everything, then they're more apt to listen to you. But usually what we do is we defend, or we litigate, or we interrupt. We point out flaws in logic, which is just frustrating. And when you point out some flaws in somebody's logic, because we're all imperfect when we speak, and we all choose the wrong words at various times. And that's not what I meant. You know what I meant is what we have to say. Well, what if you know what you meant? Then why don't you say what you can see how this spirals. Um, uh, uh, but it's things like when somebody says something, and there's really easy ways to do it. Things like, go on, tell me more. What else? And they keep talking. And you go quiet and you feel the space. Tell me more. Go on. And eventually, it's all out. And then there's a safe space for you to respond and express yourself in a constructive way. But that's correct. We do not teach listening, and listening is the way to create to build trust with someone. You make someone feel heard, they'll trust you. You know, it is the way to find common ground in opposition. In simple cases in business, but in more complicated cases in national politics or in global politics or in war. Why do my William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, he talks about the same thing. He goes, we have talk shows, but we don't have listen shows. He says we have peace talks, but what we really need is peace listens. And he, who's been at the table at the highest levels of peace negotiations, he said people show up and start demanding what they want, and that's how the negotiations begin. Nobody starts by saying, "So tell me why you came here." There's a great documentary that I recommend to learn this. It's called White Right, Meeting the Enemy by Dia Khan. In a nutshell, Dia is a Muslim woman living in the UK who was trolled by white supremacists to the point where the police got involved because her life was at risk. They told her to stay away from open windows. That's how bad it got. The way Dia responded was by moving to the United States and going to meet the white supremacists. And she brought her cameras. I mean, you can see it all happen in this documentary. And basically, she gave them a safe space to feel heard. Now, that sounds mad. Like, why should she give them a safe space to feel heard? They should give her a safe space. Yeah, fine, good. Like, it's never going to happen. Dia sits down with these white supremacists and she gives them a safe space to feel heard. It's extreme listening. And I say it's extreme because, they hate her, They don't just disagree with her. They want her off the planet. And she lets them empty their bucket, as she calls it. And then conversation begins. And because they feel heard, they start to trust her. And as they start to trust her, she becomes a friend. And then it creates this paradox where I'm supposed to hate this woman, but I trust her and consider her a friend. And what you see is one by one, these white supremacists, these diehard white supremacists, start dropping out of the movement because they can no longer reconcile their beliefs with reality. And if it can happen in this extreme environment, then it can happen anywhere. And all that is required for us to cross political divides or, you know, disagreements at work and things like that is one of the parties has to learn how to listen. It doesn't even require both parties to learn the skill. That's the amazing thing. And it is one of the most remarkable skills that anyone can learn. The power of listening. Yeah. So the documentary is a great extreme example of what you can do. So
So I think every time Simon Sinek explains something, he does it better than most of us and in a powerful way. But that's a good reminder to remind us as adults that the art of listening, not only does it fall a lot of times in our hands to be the best listener our kids have, but when we model that and we can teach our students to be really good listeners, it will change their lives. Like I said, if you learn how to do active listening and you learn how to really communicate with people, and the better you communicate with people, I've said this a few times already, you become a better friend, a better spouse, a better educator, you know, a better son, a better daughter. You become better at all those things. If we can teach our students how to be really good listeners, especially in the midst of conflict, then we can develop better human beings. They become better communicators. And that's going to affect them being better spouses, better parents, better brothers, better sisters. So that art of listening is something that is really worth modeling and taking the time to teach our kids how to do. Nobody ever taught me how to listen. I don't know. I mean, obviously now that I've been in education for like 100 years, I've had, you know, listening trainings. God, I did like a 10-day training. They sent me to my whole staff on how to listen. And I thought, God, by day 3, I feel like we were pretty good listeners, but we dove deep into that. We spent 10 days learning how to listen, and it was worth it. It made us a lot better communicators with each other. But, you know, if I wasn't a teacher, if I would have gone another route, nobody would have ever taught me how to listen. Nobody would have ever sent me to a training on how to be a better listener. So the likelihood of our students getting any training like that, because it's kind of just reserved for, like, you know, social work and psychology and educators, maybe law, like attorneys. I'm not talking police officers, although they could benefit from it as well. But nobody's going to teach them how to be better listeners and how to be good listeners and how to be empathetic listeners unless we model it and do it for them. And the more we practice these restorative conversations, and the more we practice doing circles and restorative justice, the better listeners and the better communicators they'll become. Long run, we've just created better humans, you know? And that could be a generational change, because if they become really good at it, they get married, their spouse sort of picks up on it. Their kids sort of pick up on it. So I know I kind of went off the deep end there a little bit, maybe got a little philosophical, but I do think that it would make a huge effect. So listening, and this just kind of reiterates some of the things. A lot of times we hear, but we don't listen. I know that you've probably heard that 1,000 times. You know, we listen to hear, but we don't, or we listen to respond, but we don't listen to hear. I can tell you right now, somebody who's got ADHD, it has taken me a really long time to listen to hear, because as soon as you say something, I process it and have like 5 responses. And so being able to calm my brain, it's taken practice. It's taken a lot of practice. First is by mirroring those emotions and feelings about the topic. Again, we've talked about this. If it's serious to them, if they feel emotional about it, then we can recognize that emotion and be empathetic about that emotion as well. As soon as we start downplaying the other person's feelings, we've lost that ability to be a good listener, because they feel, I mean, they could have a lot of feelings. They feel ashamed. They feel disconnected. They feel embarrassed. They feel like they're wasting their time. They shut down. They don't want to communicate. If it's real to them, it's real to us. And then active listening. We've talked about this, using that paraphrasing moment. And you don't have to identify every single thing they say. We had a parent meeting with the student this morning, and you know, he was just refusing to go to class. Really, he was just sitting in the hallway like all day, which I thought, God, that's twice as boring as if he just went to class. But I don't see the world the way through the lens they do. And so we had a meeting with the parent, and we just sort of talked about why he doesn't like to go to class. And it was a really um, simple solution. He just wanted music. The music had been turned off on his computer because he's a new kid and he got an old, a new computer or whatever. So they get reset. And but he was very emotional about the idea that that's all he wanted. And it was so easy for me to paraphrase because I listened to him talk for about 30 minutes about, the effect of music. And he gave a pretty good argument about, he'd Googled some stuff because he's like, there's cognitive effects to show the benefits of music. And I was like, you don't even know what cognitive means, but carry on. I love that you did the research. And he shared about all this frustration and anger and how music helps him. And all I had to do was, after him talking for 20 minutes, was say, man, music has a huge impact on you and your ability to process your emotions and learn. And he goes, yeah, that's what I've been saying. I go, man, I hear you. I didn't have to argue with him. I didn't have to carry on for 45 minutes. I just had to recognize the simplest form of the message he said, and he felt heard. And he's got really kind of longish, hairy lips dangling in his face. And all of a sudden he flicked it back and he kind of turned a little bit in his chair to communicate. And then we started talking about how to get in music and what the regulations are with music. And, you know, uh, it's so simple sometimes. This was somebody who didn't go to class and had all these things and was kind of disruptive in the hallway and, uh, made really weird noises sometimes to be disruptive. And that's all we had to do. So that communication did that. The third thing to do is present and validating, or being present when you validate their feelings. And you can do this by making just simple statements like, I understand why you're upset. They need to know that that they're upset. Or even, I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, but thank you for sharing. I'm glad that you shared with me. I appreciate you talking with me. I always ask questions like, what do you need from me? What do you need help with? How can I help you? Look, I'm here to figure this out with you. These are just simple little statements. I'm putting myself on their side of finding a solution because it's never about me and it's never going to be about me. If I have problems and I've got issues, I should probably go find an adult to talk to, not a kid. So when I'm having a conversation with the kid, I need to keep in mind that this whole conversation is really one-sided. It's all about them. Now, if I'm having a sort of conversation with the kid because they cussed at me or they're mean to me, part of that, and to be honest, I've been cussed at so many times and called every name that you could think of, plus ones that I didn't even know existed. It doesn't bother me anymore. It doesn't make me feel sad. I just go, huh. Now, if they're creative, I feel a little proud. I'm like, that was good. So I recently got glasses and I was very disappointed that one kid kept calling me Four Eyes. And I was like, that's not even creative. Like, that's been around since like the dawn of glasses. Like, you're disappointing me with your creativity. But so but I have to pretend like it, I wouldn't say pretend like it bothers me, but when I have that restorative conversation with the kid who's gone off on me and just cussed at me for 20 minutes and they're calm and I'm calm and we have that restorative conversation, a lot of what I build that around is I just felt disrespected, and I have a lot of respect for you and I care about our relationship and I appreciate that we've grown together over the last year or 6 months or whatever. I just feel really disrespected when you cuss at me. But realistically, I don't feel disrespected. I'm beyond that. I quit feeling disrespected 10 years ago. I'm just like, you're mad and you're using words that you use, whatever. But it's still worth having that conversation because I think they need to know that other adults might feel disrespected. If you talk that way to somebody outside of here, we have conversations about that. Man, if you came at somebody like that out on the streets, they're not going to be chill. They're not going to be therapeutic and take an approach like this and have a sort of conversation. Like, you could be putting your physical well-being at risk. So you got to work on regulating that now so that when that happens out somewhere that's not safe, like this school, you can keep yourself safe. So here's some effective communications. When I deal with student to student, I definitely use I statements. When I'm working with a kid, adult to student, I encourage my teachers not to use a lot of I statements because, especially with teenagers, because once you say I, it becomes all about you and then it's not about them and they're checked out because they want everything to be about them. With younger kids, I statements work really good as long as they're not used in a form to sort of create guilt. I I grew up in a family where a lot of time making you feel bad was how you were punished. I always say my mom's a very classic Italian mother, and maybe I shouldn't say that if there's other Italians and they didn't have a mom like this, but she would always say, like, oh, don't worry, Joey, I'll do it. I'll just do it all by myself. I'll just, I'm old and I'm weak, and I'll do that all by myself, and hopefully I don't hurt myself doing it. But you go play with your little friends. You do Joe stuff and don't worry about mom. And I was like, oh my God, okay. Like now I feel horrifically bad that I didn't sweep the kitchen. Like it seems like a lot, but it worked, but it also had a huge effect on my self-esteem as I got older. So just careful with that. I know you guys are like, he tells a lot of stories about himself. You get to know a little bit of me. If you're going to use I statements with kids, I would practice them. I would definitely role play those, especially with younger kids, because they're not going to understand how to properly do it unless you've done it with them. And I would go through the context of what it means. Like, I felt mad when you threw a Lego at me. We need to talk about how they don't have to say, I felt mad when you threw a Lego at me, because we're not really having a sort of conversation. Now we're having like a high level sort of controlled argument. So I think using I statements now, adult to adult, yes. Like if my teachers have conflict, and they do, I make them do restorative conversations. And I encourage them to use I messages, because it's good, because they're adults and they can process it. It just gets tricky with teenagers. And I'm sure you guys have all seen the I feel statements. And if you haven't, here they are. They're really simple. I'll walk through it super fast with you. So I even have a culminating sentence down here. I felt sad yesterday when I found out you lied to me, because I've always trusted you. I need you to trust me enough to be honest with me. So these questions tie the actions of the individual to the effect that they had. So what did I feel? Sad. When? Yesterday. Why? Because you lied to me. Why does it bother when you lie to me? Because I want you to trust me. So it kind of covers all that area. And again, you can use these with younger kids a ton. I've used them when I worked in junior high. Our elementary wing used a lot of I statements with their kids. Now, I was like the LDBD teacher, and so most of the teachers I worked with were like the behavior kids, and they used them all the time. My junior high kids got really weird with them, because junior high kids are in a weird place emotionally and developmentally, where they say I feel, then usually it's I feel like I don't care when because emotion is weird to them and they don't like to show anybody that they have it a lot of times. So here's some effective sentence creations. In the words of a good friend of mine named Tone Loke, I would say, let's just do this. So when I see or when I hear, and then you state the behavior. So when I see you outside of class, I feel like you're not wanting to get an education, or maybe you're upset with something. What I need is to figure out why you don't want to go to class. And what I'd like is you to go to class. Now, we could do these with kids as well, okay? So a kid to another kid, and they've had a conflict, and they might have said, hey, when I heard you call me outside of my name, I felt angry, or I felt disrespected. That's a lot of my junior high school kids. They feel disrespected. What I need is to understand why you would disrespect me, or these are things you can do prior to your communication. So I will sometimes have kids walk through this with me before we have a conversation with another kid. That way they can get their words right, okay? So what I need is, maybe they say, I need you to respect me. Now that we might talk about, because they'll be like, why should they respect you? Like, why do you feel like everybody should respect you? I agree with you. Everybody should respect you. But maybe what you need is for them to be a little bit nicer to you, or to give you some space. So walking through these a lot of times with a kid, like a pre-conversation, and then hoping that they kind of stick to this. They're not going to stick to a script. And anytime you script a conversation, it's not a conversation, it's a script. So kids need to have the autonomy to say how they feel and share what they want in the way that they want. These are just guidelines for them to develop that structure to begin that conversation. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. I can't see everybody nodding, but hopefully everybody got it. All right. So now there's curiosity questions. I use these as my, what's the word I'm looking for? My proactive means to communicating with kids. When I see a kid that comes in and they seem a little off, I jump into curiosity question mode. I would rather be more proactive than reactive. In fact, I do a whole thing on de-escalation, and we learn about how to communicate with kids. And one of the big things we talked about is you can avoid a lot of conflict and you can avoid a lot of crisis the more you are proactive. The more you teach everybody on your team to be proactive with your kids and build relationships, the less issues you're going to have. Plus, the more the kids are going to have, feel safe and feel comfortable and have better relationships with their adults, because you're looking out for them, and they know that because you're proactive. You notice the little things. All right. So if I have a student come in and they seem a little off, they seem a little angry, they seem a little tired, I'm definitely jumping into curiosity questions. So these are basically questions that you'd ask someone to learn more about what's going on. And they're really simple, you know, basic. How you doing today? Now you can set that up with an observation. So a lot of times I'll identify an emotion and then ask a kid, how you doing today? You seem a little upset. How are you doing today? You doing all right? What's going on? You seem a little tired. You seem a little checked out. Whatever you observe with them, you can acknowledge that you've observed that. One, most kids, if you've built a decent relationship with them, aren't angry that you observed that. If anything, you just opened the door for them to vent or for them to start communicating, and now you've got a chain of communication going that could change the entire day. So you can phrase those however you want. I just like to give examples because I think it makes sense if you can at least see what he's talking. What's he talking about? Simple questions. And they can help dive into issues. So how did it make you feel when, so-and-so cussed you out? So if they say, I'm a little upset today because I had a bad night. Well, what does a bad night look like to you? Or I'm a little upset because this kid cussed me out on the bus. All right. Well, how did it make you feel when they cussed you on the bus? What do you need him to say to you to resolve this? Or what do you think needs to be done to resolve it? We can dive right into getting into those restorative practices right off the bat. We don't have to have a 50-minute conversation. We can do it in a 3-minute window. I had a kid in the gym today throw a basketball at another kid. He thought he was passing it to him. I could tell pretty openly he was trying to throw it and hit him in the side of the head. It was not a pass. It was not a friendly little pass. And so they got pissed. And I said, come here, what's going on? He's like, he threw the ball at me. He goes, no, I didn't. I passed to him. And I was like, dude, be real. You threw the ball at him. And he goes, no, he wasn't looking. So I thought it'd be funny. I go, how does that make you feel? And he goes, well, it pisses me off because it almost hit me in the head. And that makes me mad. And I go, yeah, it would have made me mad too. I go, so what do you need to resolve this? And, young boys, he just goes, look, bro, I'm sorry. I threw the basketball at your head. And he goes, no, it's cool. Just don't do it again. And so the one kid ran off and the other kid stayed with me. And I was like, look, when you say don't do it again, it's almost like a threat. And he goes, no, I just don't mean don't ever do it again. I go, I understand that, but you guys got to be cool with each other. So it's not like we have to take this huge time and have all this scientific stuff to happen to have a real quick restorative question built with curiosity questions and some active listening and identifying emotions. So what are some quick tips if you have a problem occur? These are just a few, and these aren't going to be the solution to all problems. If they were, I'd be writing another book. So when there's a problem occur, you have to have an array of restorative responses to choose from. We talked last time about making a restorative binder, something that's built around age appropriately built around the kids that you work with. I was doing a training last Friday on de-escalation, and one of the kindergarten teachers asked me, what do you do when the whole classroom goes into crisis? And I was like, wow, how many kids are in the classroom? She said 15. I was like, I can't think of anything outside of like an earthquake or tornado or some sort of major threat that would make 15 little kids go into crisis all at once. And she said, well, it's cleanup time. And I was like, oh, I said, they're not in crisis. They just don't want to clean up. So we talked about, what kind of things can you put in place to get them ready to clean up? And what kind of restorative things can you do when, first, when you get that transition under control, because you shouldn't have that many kids going off. But once you get that transition under control and now you only have 2 or 3 kids, what sort of restorative response could you have with those 2 or 3 kids that just refuse to do cleanup? And how can you dig into that deeper to find out why they refuse? So having just a restorative response to choose from helps a lot. And the more pre-planning you can do, what are the most occurring behaviors in your school. You're aware of what the biggest issues in your school are. If you're not, go talk to your principal or your dean, or really, if you want to go to the source of things, go talk to the teachers. They always know what the most reoccurring things going on in schools are. So have an array of restorative responses to choose from. And then the person who caused harm has a chance to truly understand the impact of their actions. And they have to be heard and understood, and they have to understand it themselves. You want to have a positive and lasting effect on a person rather than punish or exile them. Punishment doesn't work in the way that we think it works. Punishment's just harm. And of course, kicking kids out of school, then they come to my school. But that never works either, because that robs kids of an opportunity to have access to a guaranteed education. I think expulsion is like the worst thing in the world. It rubs me the wrong way all the time. And especially little kids. Like when I see like a kindergartner or a first grader expelled, I'm like, what could they possibly have done to be expelled? And I get it because I read the case files. I think to myself, is it really expulsion going to teach them anything? I mean, they are little, like the brain processing and developmentally. I can't understand why a board would justify doing that. But the goal is that everybody has to be part of that shift, and it's a gradual shift. It takes a long time. If your school is going to implement restorative practices, it's going to take 3 to 5 years, and it takes everybody getting on board and everybody be willing to do it. So if you're doing this with your K-3 school, that means every classroom on that campus has to learn how to do restorative practices and buy into the idea that they will start the year doing circles. They will use circles for educational purposes, and they will use circles for problem-solving purposes. They have to understand they're going to have restorative conversations. They have to understand that the teacher will have restorative conversations and not the principals and the deans and people like that. That weight's going to shift, and it's going to be put way more up on the staff so that they can have ownership of that and take back some of the power in their school. I think the teacher should be some of the most powerful people in the school. As a principal, I feel like my job is just to make sure that, paperwork gets signed and to help out the teachers when they need it. So if they got an issue, my job's to help them through that issue. If they don't know how to do something, my job's to teach them how to do that. If they need training, I can train them. If they need mentoring, I can mentor. But they should have a lot of power in the school. And they have a lot of power in my school. We're meeting today after school, and they've got an issue they want to discuss with me about a change to the bathroom routine, which will probably change it if that's what they think will work. So a lot of this is hard, okay? And also when you're working with the kids, the school, we talked about the school embracing the approach, and this challenge, since treating harm as a teachable moment, not an opposition, not an occasion for punishment, is hard for a lot of educators. They have a really hard time struggling with that punitive to restorative, because what they think is nothing's happening to these kids. And my response is, what would you like to happen? And it's crazy how they don't have anything. Well, I want them punished. How would you like me to punish them? I don't know, do something. Well, if you're all about punishment, come up with 5 or 6 punishments. You want me to beat them? I mean, one of us is going to go to jail if that happens. You want me to kick them out? We can't kick them out. Like, they have a free and equal right to education up to a certain age, and that's not going to help them. What that's going to do is create more issues, because they have education gaps, and those education gaps get bigger and bigger, and then they dig themselves in a hole where they don't understand things, and they become overwhelmed with the whole education system in general, and then they drop out. So let's try not to do educational gaps, especially early on in any grade levels, and in high school where they fall credit deficient and now they give up on the whole system and quit school. Like, isn't our goal to graduate kids and put them into society and have them be productive? Well, kicking them out of the one place that's going to teach them to be productive citizens isn't a solution. Okay. Yeah, some kids are hard to deal with. Making them go away makes your life easier, but you just turn their life into a living hell. You just destroyed one life because you don't want to deal with it for a year. So kicking them out's not an option. Beating them's not an option. So what are we going to do? I think the best solution is to teach them how to learn from their behavior and teach them how to process their behavior. And especially the most important thing, teach them how to make decisions when they're under emotional distress, because that is going to be something they have to do their whole life. Anybody who's got kids knows that when you've got a toddler or a baby, especially, gosh, our kids are all 2 years apart. So at one point I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And it was all I could take not to jump out windows someday. Like, I was in college full time, so I was a stay-at-home dad in college, and my wife was working residential. And God bless mothers that stay at home with their children. Your job is incredibly complex. I will never say a word again. That is truly a task, but that's high duress. high emotion, dealing with little kids, and I can't hurt them. They're my children. So we're creating better parents, better citizens by doing this. So I wanted you guys to see an opportunity to see restorative practices with younger kids. So here's a video for that. I hope that this helps out to see this in real time.
I love your ability to admit that you want to do better at times, and then how committed you are to doing that. Circles are a time for the community to come together and develop themselves as individuals, develop their relationships, and really address community work. And we actually believe that by doing that, kids will succeed more academically because they feel safe and they're in trusting relationships.
Valor is a middle school based in Nashville, Tennessee. We really value our relationships with each other, and we work really hard to create the school community that we want to be a part of. And so Circle is an important part of that work.
Our circle model is something that both our adults and our scholars do every week for an hour. Is there more you need to talk about?
Circle happens in single gender groups of about 20 or so students, led by their mentor teacher.
That's really impressive. Circle is done in a structured manner. It's very different than the classroom experience that they have at other points during the day. It kind of invites them to be exploring and learning in a different way. Every circle will follow the same basic cadence.
All right, we're gonna start by doing our True North.
It'll always start with what we call True North practice.
Start by taking one silent, deep breath in, and then slowly letting it out.
It's a mindfulness-based practice for everybody in the circle to let go of the busy day and really focus our attention on each other.
We are going to do a weather check-in. Who would like to start us off?
And then it moves into a check-in.
Today I'm feeling foggy. I'm sleepy.
Everybody has to check in, even if it's minimal.
I feel sunny because it's Friday.
Being able to name their emotions, I think it humanizes everybody involved. It really helps us see each other as people who have feelings.
And then we move into what we call work.
I was a little bit frustrated.
So this is the biggest step of the whole relationship work. You need to let Jaron know that you understand why he felt frustrated. Okay. Communities need to work together in order to solve problems. And so people have the opportunity to bring work into Circle.
Examples of work are relationship work with your peers or with your teacher. And we might have people take responsibility for something that had an impact on our community. We also do activities like sharing your life story, reflecting on your values.
Sawyer, are you ready to do your presentation?
The topic I investigated was religion.
Scholars really push themselves and put a lot of effort and thought into the work. You see them starting to become more thoughtful about themselves, more self-aware.
This experience helped me learn that I can be kinder to people with different perspectives.
Then we always end with appreciations.
You always make me laugh, and you always kept trying to get better.
It's a way for the community to appreciate the positive impacts we have on each other.
I'd like to appreciate you for talking to me over spring break. It's like a mini family. It's a place where you know you're safe. I don't talk about my feelings much, but in Circle I can, because I know I can trust them.
I think having the adults do the practice themselves and really know the importance of it is our main strategy.
In through your nose and out through your mouth. Allow your breath to anchor you.
Adults drive this type of work in the community.
Stephen, would you mind kicking us off?
There's some work that I've done with kids in this past week that I need to bring to Circle. So in Circle today, I did a process called taking responsibility, which is used for repairing a relationship with the community as a whole. You step into the circle and you own whatever action you took. Like, I recognize that my mistake put you in a really uncomfortable position. And I have been at schools where if something were done and not talked about, it kind of festered. Here, and you positively work to rebuild the relationship. Moving forward, I commit to using the systems that are in place and thinking before I act in such a way. I ask kids to do it every day. And I think that's why Valor works. It's because like everything the kids are asked to do, the adults are expected to do as well.
It helps a lot because they also know what we're going through. Other schools can say like, you don't understand here, teachers, but like we can't say that because they do the same thing as us and they know what we're going through.
Circle is a space that's safe enough that we can share and can be vulnerable. It also builds relationships that help us become better teachers, help them become better learners.
You guys did a really good job. Appreciate yourselves for that.
Now, I would say that's definitely kind of a deep dive into restorative practices. We do circles with our staff here at the school. I think personal accountability is best done one-on-one. We don't do a lot of personal accountability in the circle, but we do teach our staff to have hard conversations because we expect our kids to have hard conversations. So if I expect our kids to have a restorative conversation with each other, knowing that, you know, developmental wise, they're not as forward thinking as hopefully most of my staff are, that's a big ask for them. And that's a big push for them, especially because a lot of kids are driven mostly by emotion and feeling. And, you know, they have a lot of triggered responses. A lot of it's impulsivity. And if I'm asking any kid from kindergarten to 12th grade to sit down and look at another kid, own their part, be restorative, and move on, adults need to do that too. So just one of the things that I do that's not like that is if any adult comes and complains to me, I tell them the clock has now started. So you have 24 hours to talk to the staff that you just came and complained about, and I'm going to check in with them in 24 hours. And if you haven't talked to them in 24 hours, that means the three of us are going to sit down and have a restorative conversation together. And another thing that we encourage a lot is, and you can use different terminology. We call it just, are you open? And we call it just getting back with people. And the rule is that you don't have to always be open in the moment, but you have to be open when asked. So if somebody's upset with something I've done and they say, hey, Joe, are you open? If I'm not in the moment, I might say, not right now. Can I get back to you? But typically, I would say, yeah, I'm open. What's up? And they'll say, okay, I just want to talk to you about this. And that builds a lot more trust among the staff. Plus, we expect kids to do that every single day. So we should probably be able to do it too. You know, it's easy when we have a restorative conversation with the kids because one, we still see ourselves as the authority figure. You know, we see ourselves as we're the adult and we're the kid. And so we're more comfortable and confident. And plus, you know, we've got a little bit more brain development going on than they do. So we're really capable of having those conversations and being in control because we see ourselves as, I'm the adult, I'm the authority figure. I can talk to this kid without any problem. Kids don't see each other that way at all. They see each other as equals. And hopefully you see the people you work with as equals. And you should be able to have those same conversations. So one of the things that I like that leads into that I think goes really hand in hand with restorative practices, and we'll get into this as much as we can. We've got about 40 minutes left. So we'll just kind of dive into this. Has anybody ever heard of what's called positive peer intervention or a positive peer culture? They're kind of the same thing, and we'll compare the two. So our goal is, and we're pretty far along on our restorative practices journey. I think that we're starting to talk a lot about how next year, I think it threw us back. We were two campuses on two different areas with two very different cultures of kids, and we all moved into one big building this year. And so combining those staff and those kids and combining all those cultures where we had a lot of rural kids and now we have a lot of suburban kids and they're all in one place, all going to school together. Where before, because of the way the campuses were set up, all the kind of rural kids or like the farm kids or country kids all went to one school and all of more our suburban kids went to the other campus. Well, they're all together now. And so we're learning to mend and become friends and enjoy each other and appreciate our differences and embrace all the different opportunities we have to learn from one another. For the staff, it took about, an hour. For the kids, it's going to take all year. So, so that's kind of pushed us back a little bit. Still very active with restorative practices and everything I've talked about today and the day before. But my goal was to get us to a positive peer culture within a few years, where students become leaders and leaders become opportunity to have choice and voice in their school. And you can do positive peer culture with younger kids all the way up to older kids. It's just the approach is a little bit different. Younger kids, you're not going to give major leadership roles because they're just, developmentally, they're just not capable of making huge decisions. But they can make little decisions and become good at that, because later on that becomes better at making bigger decisions, because you have confidence in your ability to make decisions and look at things from different views. So how do you compare the two? Well, I guess, yeah, here's a video on positive peer culture.
Today about positive peer pressure and how it can transform our schools and our education system. I wanted to start off with a quick story about my husband and I. This is my husband, Ian. He's cute. We met about 6 years ago. And of course, in early relationships, we talk about our childhood and our adolescence. Now, Ian and I had very different experiences in adolescence. Ian was a rapper. He was an athlete and was incredibly popular. So, obviously, he frequented many parties and social gatherings. I, on the other hand, was your quintessential nerd. I was awkward, glasses, braces, the whole 9 yards. So the kind of peer pressure that we experience as adolescents is pretty different. That was probably what Ian experienced. This was probably what I experienced. Nerd peer pressure. Now, I was always enamored by the idea of peer pressure. It's a subtle thing. It's not what most people think it is. Peer pressure happens because you're around a certain group. It's not that they're telling you that you have to do drugs or alcohol. It just is the fact that you're around certain people. Adolescents are 6 times more likely to drink alcohol if their peers do so. And so it can be incredibly powerful. Now, I had a question. Can peer pressure work to enhance academic and social-emotional skills? And even more importantly, can positive peer pressure be a norm in schools or even popular? And so I came to the idea of something that I like to call trust circles. How did this start? Well, I put some students into groups, heterogeneous at the time, and taught them social-emotional skills for working with each other. I encouraged them to have difficult conversations and encouraged them to encourage each other. Started in one classroom. And in one classroom, we saw some pretty incredible results. Kids were really helping each other in both academics and character. And so we tried it with an entire grade because those students had learned everything, all the social emotional skills. We carried it on to 5th and 6th grade. And now, at Kip Infinity Middle School, in the entire school, we had effectively created a norm of positive peer pressure. This is a 5th grade Kip circle. We call them Kip circles now. This group is very diverse, academically, behaviorally, some class clowns, and some nerds. But they love each other. Here are some things that they say. We help each other. We help each other by coming up for lunch and helping each other with our homework. We created study buddies to call each other each night and make sure we completed that homework. That's Camelia and Georgiani. Justin says, my trust circle helps me to check my math. If I had an answer wrong, they would tell me it was wrong. I would go back and fix it. If I got it right, they would say, good job, Justin. Thought that was an interesting detail he threw in there. But they do, they effectively learn how to encourage each other and want to do it. Unfortunately, many schools believe that when students don't behave or don't do the right thing, exclusion is the answer. I argue something very different. Students are hardwired to socialize. They're hardwired to learn. They're sponges. What if we combine those two things? Research shows that students are more likely to take in information when it's from someone that they can relate to. They personalize it and effectively apply it. So it can be powerful for academic success and social emotional well-being. And it can be school-wide. But how? Make the time. Schools often don't have entire curriculum for character education. Our school spends about 30 minutes each day making sure that groups can meet or getting some sort of character education. It has to be put in the day-to-day schedule. You put in the time for things that you prioritize. You have to build up the group. We play icebreakers, cooperative games. We teach them how to work in groups to solve problems. And at the very end, we make sure they apply the learning to a project or activity that either has to do with school or some sort of community service project. And here's Kiara's 6th grade trust circle. If you take a look, they're working on a way to solve her problem. So she's struggling a little bit in math. And so each of the kissers are giving her advice on her plan. Pretty cool. This is one of my favorite pictures. These are our 8th grade girls and their KIP circles. If you take a look here, their KIP circle is My Little Pony. I don't know why they chose that, but they do set goals and they set an entire group goal. They learn how to goal set, check in, reassess. And it takes a lot of teaching. They have to learn how to use data, grades, attendance to create a goal. They create their own SMART goals, which as an adult, I wish someone had taught me. And they check in weekly, reflect, and reassess. The other thing is deliberate practice. Kids need time to practice social emotional skills. They don't know how to have a difficult conversation. And again, as adults, we don't necessarily know how to do that either. And it's not easy. It's not fun. It's really demanding. But it's repeated a lot and it's under the direction of a teacher. And so these are the things they work on consistently with their peer circles. Changing negative thoughts to more optimistic thoughts, having a difficult conversation with others about risky behavior, and appropriately shouting out their teammates for academic success. And so, kids are hardwired to socialize and to learn. Positive peer pressure does exist. You can be Ian and popular and still get that positive peer pressure. Here's Skylar.
Circle has helped me because we're like a good support system from bottom to top, because instead of me worrying about meeting my goals, we can like work together on it. So instead of me saying, oh, I don't know how I'm gonna meet this goal, we like work together, and I work with 2 other people. So we usually say, oh, we're gonna meet this goal instead of just doing it alone.
For schools, don't allow students to go it alone, like Skylar said. Have faith in students' ability to influence each other positively, if only given the space and the chance. Thank you.
I was looking through the chats and I had a question I wanted to see if I could address. There was one that said, I know what you mean when you refer to circles, but possibly Some are not sure. Describe a concrete example. So I know we talked a lot about circles in part A. So just like to keep this really brief so we can dive into this a little bit. You can use a circle for anything. We use circles. If you're asking about my staff circles, we sit in a circle as a staff at least once a week. And, sometimes we're just problem solving. Sometimes we're sharing out positives. Sometimes we're just reflecting upon the day and different things. With kids, we do circles when in classrooms, when they're struggling with something. Our junior high did a circle today because somebody threw something and then everybody threw something and it ended up being like a food fight, but with not food, with like pencils and things. So we did a circle around, just to reiterate classroom rules. So you can do them to introduce, my English teachers use them all the time to introduce like different novels they're going to read or even recap chapters and things like that. So hopefully, I don't know if that helped or not. Hopefully it helped a little bit. So I was going to kind of just go through a little introduction of how positive peer influence and restorative practices are related. So you can see here when you put them side by side. We talked a lot about restorative practices and the focus on resolving conflicts, supporting positive, safe school, mitigate the negative effects of punitive discipline, proactive strategies to create a sense of community, and restorative processes like circles, conflict resolution, peer-led practices to respond to incidents, things like that. So when you look at a positive peer culture or positive peer interventions, it's very similar. You're focusing on the care and concern of others and defining the element of a positive peer culture, stresses responsibility, empowering the youth to discover their greatness. So here's where you start giving kids opportunities to lead small groups. If you've got older kids and younger kids, I might have a high school kid do a restorative circle or run a restorative conversation with some younger kids. Now, assuming that high school kid, again, has been kind of taught how to run that circle. We used this when I worked in residential and when I worked at a detention center. We did a lot of focusing on who we picked as people who we thought could run those circles or run those groups or do those positive, the restorative conversations. And we basically trained them how to do that. I'm not as in depth as like the training that we've done over these last two meetings that we've had, but just a general idea and then a lot of monitoring them. They don't do it alone. There's always like an adult, but the adult is just there more for observation. So getting the kids to do that gets them bought into it more. And now you've got what I call like cross-dimensional relationships. You've got high school kids who know junior high kids or junior high kids that know elementary kids, which now makes you feel if you're all in one building or if you're in separate buildings, it makes those older kids building relationship with those younger kids feel safer because they have a person. They have a person that's older than them, that's bigger than them, that they look up to, who helped them solve a problem. Our goal is to make caring a fashionable thing. Make hurting people not okay. Make it unacceptable as a school culture. That when somebody's rude to another person, you've got enough people who are willing to have those conversations or even intervene with another kid in a polite and helpful way, that it just eliminates it. Bullying's just not part of our culture. Being mean to people is just not part of our culture. And the peer pressure part comes in where if everybody's on board with this, and I wouldn't say everybody, 80% of your kids are on board with the idea that this is the school environment that we want. This is the school environment that we're responsible for, and it's the school environment we created. That other 20% of kids is going to feel left out because that's what happens when you make it, this whole group believes that being nice to people, and I'm not saying that everybody's going to run around hugging and giving each other gifts and things like that, but everybody's nice to each other. Everybody's polite to each other. That other percentage that's not bought into that is going to either buy in because of the positive pressure or they're just going to struggle. Oh, sorry, I'm a little ahead there. All right, I was just looking at the time. Okay, so positive peer intervention or positive peer culture mixed in with restorative practices, it's an adult and peer-driven model. That means you have groups of kids who may be elected or selected, depending on how you want to do it, who sit down with adults and help make school decisions. Now, obviously not major school decisions. They're not going to sit down and help plan the lunch menu or be involved in the budget in any way. But they help make decisions like, do we want to let kids wear hats to school? And I think I may have given the hoodie example for our school last time we talked. If I didn't, I'll just throw it out there real quick. So kids can't wear hoodies in school. The biggest reason that is because it's hard to recognize them on camera. So if something were to happen, it's hard to determine who that kid is based on any external footage because hoodies kind of cover their face. So we've had kids complain they can't wear hoodies for a really long time. And so I explained to them, I'm not in the business of making stuff up. So I just told them, like, this is the reason why. This is why schools don't allow it. And I only have about 7 kids that wear hoodies out of like the 80 or something that we have here. I have about 7 that consistently wear hoodies. And so the boys came to me with this solution and they said, hey, you know who we all are. Like, there's not a ton of us here. We have like 7 classrooms, 1 gym, and 1 long hallway. Like, if you don't think you could recognize us if you saw us on camera? I was like, no, I could probably recognize all of you. I could pick you out of any lineup. And they're like, so what's the big deal if we wear a hoodie, if we don't tie it around our face and we just wear it? I was like, I don't know. I feel like you're making a really good point. And so we sat down and we just talked about parameters around wearing a hoodie, which seems like a weird conversation, but it's an important conversation for those kids. They got to be part of that conversation. And now they can wear hoodies in school. They just can't pull it all the way over their face, and they have to have their, they can't tie it closed. And they can't, if they sleep and cover their head with the hoodie, then they lose the hoodie because now you're using it as a tent to sleep in. So we just came up with some parameters around wearing hoodies, and now they can wear hoodies. And it's, a heck of a lot stressful for us, constantly telling kids, take your hood down, take your hood down, take your hood down, take your hood down. It was the same 7 kids all the time. But that also gave those same 7 kids the ability to feel empowered, like they have the opportunity to come and change things at their school. For me, it seems simple. I'm like, I really don't care if you wear the hoodie or not. I'm just telling you what the rules are. And then I realized I am kind of my own alternative school. I think I can make my own rules whenever I want. So we're just going to have different rules here. We have a lot of different rules when it comes to structure. So why not have one when it comes to that? So anyways, getting those kids involved gives them that opportunity to take ownership and leadership in the school. And we picked 2 of those boys who sit now on they're part of our leadership group for our students that help lead the school. So that's kind of where it starts at. And the goal is to improve social competence and cultivate strength in your kid. Put your kids in an opportunity where they get to make decisions. And again, goes back to that metacognition. We get to work with younger kids. We get out a little group of 3rd graders and we say, well, what do we want to address in the school? And they come up with these ideas. We break that down. Well, why is this idea, or why is this rule, or why is this something you want to change? What are your thoughts behind it? What do you think it would look like moving forward? How would we change that? How would we implement it? Do we just do it tomorrow, or do we take like a week to do it? Kids can plan these things out, they don't have to put together spreadsheets or anything like that. They just have to be good communicators, which we're teaching, and sit down and have helpful conversations that are goal-driven. Once you get that restorative process put in place in your school, you can move towards a positive peer intervention, positive peer culture, whatever you want to call it. And it changes a lot of things because now you've got leaders in your school. I can give you an example of when I worked in a positive peer culture, I had student leaders in every single one of my classes. And if I came in and my classroom was really loud or disruptive, I could just look at one of those kids and say, it seems kind of loud. That's all I would say. And they would stand up and politely go, hey guys, we need to focus up to Mr. McQueen. Class getting ready to start, man. Come on, let's get in our seats. That meant 10 times more coming from that kid than it did me. I could have stood up and did like the quiet coyote and be quiet, stop and listen. And I've always worked with behavior kit and they would have never ignored me. But when that peer leader stood up, then, oh, that must mean something. We should do something. I rarely had to deal with any incidents in my classroom. I could just say, seems like a lot of people are kind of not bought into this lesson today, and there's a lot of side talking. And I could have one kid stand up and go, guys, let's focus up. Come on, pay attention. It's crazy how it works. And we also develop care and concern for others. So when kids have to help kids solve problems, when kids have to walk kids through an event that happened, especially if it's like a 6th grader helping 2 2nd graders, they develop a little care and concern for those kids. They feel like I'm somebody who can help other people now. And again, it's made fashionable. Caring for people's fashionable, hurting people's not cool. We don't do it around here. People learn to trust and respect and take responsibility for their behaviors because they can be held accountable by their peers, which is more effective than me holding you accountable. Me holding you accountable, what do I know? Some silly old man, you know, gray hair and kind of fat. Like, I know nothing about the world. But Todd, who's like one of your buddies, he knows all the complexities of Earth. And if he comes and he tells me that I should change my ways, I probably should, because Todd is just a man among men in the third grade. You know, he's very influential. He's going places. And then you can establish peer norms. And that kind of falls under that when we talked about restorative practices and respect agreements and how we do like classroom management. Now it's again goes back to that whole idea that kids develop that management piece, and it's easier for them to hold each other accountable because it's not my rule, it's your rule. You came up with it. And at the end of the day, it's a rule. We all try to come up with different names for, you know, their norms or their classroom practices, their rules. Like, we don't punch each other. That's a rule. You can call it a norm or a practice. It's just sort of a thing that we don't do. And also they become positive value. There is a positive value put on behavior change. So changing your behavior and becoming somebody positive is more acceptable rather than selling out or not staying, you know, with your cool friends who want to break all the rules or do certain things. It becomes part of the norm. I think we'll probably have time for one more slide, and then I'll pass it off to Jordan, assuming I have another slide. All right. So what is a positive peer culture and restorative practice? What's your overall goal? One is to meet the needs of youth for attachment. They need something to attach to. They need something healthy to attach to. They're going to attach to each other regardless. So we might as well create a whole tribe of people worth attaching to. And also some autonomy, some control over the world around them. And also teaching them altruism. Altruism, I know, is a complex word. It's hard to think most people are altruistic anymore. But altruism is basically, I do the right thing for simply it's the right thing to do. I don't expect any payment. It just makes me feel internally good, and I move on. So I see these like TikTokers and YouTubers and stuff who like they give homeless people money, but they film themselves doing it, and then they get 20,000 views. And I was like, did you do it for the person, or did you do it for the views? If you really wanted to help them, you would have just done something for them, had a conversation with them, and not treated them like a prop in your show, and talked to them and got to know them and not told anybody about it unless they asked. It cultivates our strength in our kids, finding their strengths. Some kids are leaders, some kids aren't. Some kids are planners. Some kids are just more quiet doers, but cultivating those strengths in those kids and finding out what works for them and then building on it. Again, we want to convert negative peer influence into a care and concern for others. So we want to have a positive peer influence. We want to develop social interest through leadership and guidance, which means that the more we start to do collectively as a group and we do things for the community and stuff like that, the more we get bought into our community and the more our kids get bought into our community. The more programs, positive programs they're exposed to as a large group. Like, if you bring in a speaker that wants to promote an after-school program, most of the kids are going to be like, lame, dumb, I'm not going to that. That's lame. Really, part of them wants to go to that. They're like, man, that kind of seems cool. Like, they have a whole basketball thing and like they have a baseball team. Like, man, but my buddies don't want to do it, so I don't want to do it, so I'm going to think it's lame. If you can get the majority of your kids bought into something like that, then now it becomes cool to get involved in that after-school program. So converting that negative peer into care and concern for others and developing social interest through leadership and guidance. And then learn to communicate in a circle setting. Again, we talked a lot about circles in part A. We talked a little bit about them today. Develop individual and group accountability. So you hold yourself accountable, but you're also willing to hold other people accountable in a helpful way. And then understanding of how individual struggles can affect a whole group and a community. Those are kind of our goals. I think that's it. I know that Jordan wanted a few minutes at the end. I hopefully I gave you enough time. And then, of course, I will be more than happy to field any questions you guys have before we wrap up, if you guys want to ask any questions.
So, Joe, there's a lot of reflective statements that follow a restorative conversation, do you use those, or are they majority of what you do, like a circle?
I think you can do them in both. I think that reflective statements, I might be reflecting just to paraphrase kind of in a way, but I'm also might have a student who might reflect, and I usually will have to prompt that. Like, what do you think now that this is all done? And this may be after, one kid leaves the office because they're fine, the other kid's sitting with me, especially if that kid was like the victim or the person that kind of took the brunt of whatever. I might say, how do you feel like that went? Do you feel good? Do you feel like you got what you needed out of that? Same thing when the student this morning, when his mom left, everybody was pretty happy. And she left and said, he said, can I walk her out the door? And I said, yeah, we'll come back here afterwards. And then when he came back, I was like, do you feel like you got everything out of that? You don't feel like we tried to, like, get your mom involved for a negative reason? Like, did you see that we were all on board? Like, you got a whole crew of people here, man, that just wants to help you. And then, circles, you can throw out reflective questions. What did you guys think of yesterday when this event happened? We're processing this event. Or, it's really easy academically. My English teacher, like I said, uses it for novels, and she'll say, what did you think of this chapter? Open opinions. Anybody can say what they want. And there are kids that are like, this whole book sucks and it stinks. She's like, okay. At least we're not reading it forever. Anybody else?
Well, I don't want to monopolize, but I sure would like to know how you did. What was your beginning with your staff to uh, get them to be willing to even look at circles?
Well, it took a while. There was, and I've gone through when I first got here, and I've been here for this, my 5th year here. It was a hot mess. Kids were beating the snot out of each other day, running out of school, breaking windows, jumping out windows. Like, we're on one story. But it was a mess. And so once we established or reestablished structure and accountability and things like that, and then people were shocked that the kids weren't beating each other up anymore. Then we said, okay, now that we have all this structure in place, now that we have everybody trained on how to do therapeutic interventions, now that we feel safe, and we had a few teachers leave because they didn't want to implement any of that, and that's fine. And we got enough people on board, then we really started jumping right into restorative practices. And part of that was the circle process was the first and easiest thing to introduce. We're going to do circles. I'm going to do restorative conversations. I'm going to do a lot of restorative stuff with the kids, but I want you guys to start with circles. And I just told them it was mandatory. They had to have one a week, every day, every week of the school year. And then I would come sit in on them. And I've been lucky that I've got a really good assistant director who loves restorative practices as well. And so she and I would just sit in on a lot of circles and then just letting them go. Sometimes they were terrible. But then we're doing reflection with that teacher afterwards. Like, what do you think? How do you think that went? And they'd be like, it sucked. It didn't go well. We're like, well, let's talk about that. Let's learn from that. How do we grow this to be better? And, getting the kids bought in. And I would tell them, you got to get them to buy into the little things before the big things. And I don't know if I told you guys the story last time. I had this big burly guy, big beard, and he was a brand new teacher. And he's like, I'm not going to sit in circles and kumbaya while we all light our lighters and cry. And I thought, God, I hope not. Like, that would suck. That would be a terrible circle. And about 6 months into the school year, he's like, oh, man, we had a rough morning. I shut it down and we did a circle. And man, huge growth. Kids shared a lot about, a lot of kids had a rough weekend. And so we broke that down and we kind of got some of that off the table and got some support going for everybody. But, yeah, it was totally worth it. And I thought, that's the same guy that 6 months ago was like, I'm not going to sit and light lighters and cry around the campfire. And now he's like, yeah, we totally needed a circle. So it just sort of slowly took time. It's a shift in culture because again, a lot of teachers are still in that punitive mindset. I'm going to send them to the office. You do something to them that makes them feel bad enough that they come back and they're okay with me for the rest of the day. And that's not working. It's not ever going to work, especially moving forward. Not with our kids that we have. It's not an effective means of getting kids to grow and learn. Hopefully that helped.
Joe, you had one question in the chat. They would like to hear the structured rules for kids' bathrooms that you mentioned previously.
No. Yeah, we have had struggles with the bathrooms since the start of the year. At first, it was just ask to go to the bathroom and go to the bathroom. Um, our boys' bathroom's fine, except they don't aim well. But other than that, they get in, they get out. They handle business. They don't want to really kick it in the bathroom. They just it's not their place. Our girls' bathroom, though, it is the hub of where all things happen. And so we started doing we've done a few things this year. We started off, we did punch cards where every time they went to the bathroom they had to get a card punched, and this was not my idea. The teacher's idea. And they said if they go at lunch and they go at breakfast and they go in homeroom, then they should only have two other bathroom options a day. That's 5 bathroom options for being at school for 6 hours. And so they'll get a punch card. And I was like, well, let's try that out. Well, that they tore their punch cards up. They threw their punch cards on the ground. They stole their teacher's punchers. And I was like, it's not really working well. So then they went to just, I have like enough paras that they could radio that a kid needed to go to the bathroom and have a para come get them. And that worked well for a little while. And then we did post-it notes outside the door every hour of somebody who has to go to the bathroom. And then the same person would come and pull that post-it and say, hey, Kyle, Sarah, and Todd, and take you to the bathroom. But the idea was that they would know. So the next hour, if Kyle, Sarah, and Todd were on there, we're like, y'all just went to the bathroom, you're fine. So now I think we're going back to the idea that we're just going to radio them to the bathroom. And now that we have a staff that's pretty much in the halls all day, this is where I think they're going with this. They'll present this to me today. That they'll just monitor them back and forth in the bathroom and make sure that we're not gathering in the bathroom. I think it's a lot of to do about a bathroom personally, but it seems to be the thing that the teachers are hyper focused on. They want to fix this bathroom issue. Personally, I would just say we have somebody in the hall all day. If somebody goes to the bathroom and they're gone for 5 minutes, go kick them out. But they want to have a structured approach to that. They want to have like a process. And so we can nosedive 1,000 processes until we find one that works. But if it's something that they feel is important enough that we want to address it in a circle again, then we'll address it in a circle again. We'll keep coming up with, at the end of the day, nobody's being harmed. It's not like kids are peeing their pants. And really, if our kids got to go to the bathroom, they're just going to walk out of class whether you tell them they can or not. They're alternative. You're not stopping them. So I think if they want to explore it, we'll explore it. We'll break it down as a team, and eventually we'll come up with a solution that makes everybody happy. Like I said, I think we've got so many things we do well that if that's what they want to hyper focus on, then let's just run it.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. If there's any other questions, feel free to add them to the survey, or you can always email us and I can get it back to Joe. Joe's going to provide his slides, so you will be getting another email from me. But again, thank you, Joe, so much for coming back for Part B. It's good to hear that internationally this is starting to take off, and that schools are looking for connection rather than punishment. So that is really exciting to hear. But again, thank you so much.